All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll do our usual. There'll be a little bit of administrivia, and then we will move into your questions, which I do not want to give short shrift. I know we're a little bit behind, but that's not unsolvable given where we are. And then we'll move into the last couple of cases. The only bit of administrivia is this is the last class in which I will be cold calling on people unless I have to. So if you feel like I haven't called on you enough during the semester, feel free to send me an email if there's a specific case you'd like to work on going forward, or just raise your hand when I ask if somebody'd like to set up the cases. I am perfectly capable of, like just ranking random assignments if I'm not getting volunteers, but I think I'd like to leave that up to people so that you've got maximum flexibility in these last couple of classes. And I know you're working on other things like your memos. I have on good authority that's just gone through. And there are other things that you've got at the end of the semester, so I'm trying to keep that as low cost to you as possible. That's it for administrivia, other than as of next Wednesday, that'll be our last class. I will be available except for on the 21st, which will not exist as a day for me. I will move straight from the 20th to the 22nd. And so I'll be over the Pacific for that. But other than that, I should be broadly available for you and your study groups to meet virtually, remotely as you go through exam questions. Do you have any other questions on administrivia as we close this out? Rock on. Oh yeah, go ahead for it. I know. That's a note that somehow continues to propagate through my syllabi. I have eradicated it every year, and every year apparently I save the damn syllabus in the wrong folder so that I reuse this one. By this point, it's tradition. All right, and course of dealing, really. Course of dealing, not course of performance though, because that would be this class, right? Course of dealing is prior classes. All right, that's one problem with being a lawyer, right? Your jokes just get lamer and lamer and lamer. Hilarious jokes about, course of performance. Okay, anything else? All right, well then let me just remind us briefly where we are. This won't take long. We're dealing with conditions. We have a contract. It's been properly formalized. We've got a grip on what the meanings of the words in the contract mean. We know what's at stake if one party sues the other for breach of contract. It's just that one party or the other or both have said that because of the occurrence of a condition, then they should be excused from their failure to perform the contract. And we've got two kinds of conditions. We've got express conditions and implied conditions. With respect to express conditions, the only thing we can really say is, look, read the contract, and if it's not clear, then courts prefer a construction of a promise over a condition because the construction of a given clause as a promise doesn't cause that forfeiture, right? The court is acting as a contracts court. This is a contracts class. We very much want contracts to be formed and enforced. And if they weren't enforced, no one would form them. And so the courts are saying things like, no, we're not going to just have all these get out of jail free cards interpreted as get out of jail free cards if the parties didn't have the foresight to label them as legitimate get out of jail free cards. But that's only, again, as with all of our express interpretation questions, goes back to the very first day of the very first period of the class saying, well, wait a minute, it's really hard to teach a course about contract law if what you think is going on is that all we're doing is looking at the words of the contract, which is what courts often say they are, because we saw what happened, right? The parties just label it a condition precedent. And generally speaking, unless it's an insurance contract or the court has some other compelling reason not to go with that characterization, the court's just going to go with that characterization. And even if it doesn't, it's sort of a boring set of cases to read because all you get out of them is to tell your clients when you're looking at this stuff, hey, if you want it to be a condition precedent, treat it as a condition precedent. Call it a condition precedent, even call it a condition precedent in that particular clause if it's all that important to you, right? Call it a condition precedent right then and there in front of it so we don't have to play with this game with headings and interpretation. That's That's all we can say about express conditions. Implied conditions, we have a more interesting set. There are two implied conditions. The first implied condition is that it is an implied condition of every contract that there be no prior uncured material breach of that contract by the other party. Now that's a wild one because it's turning a promise into a condition. And specifically when it's saying one party has time to perform and the other party doesn't, can just do it all at once, then the party who's got time to perform, they're the ones that need to get it done first, unless, as Aidan pointed out, the parties do arrange some kind of installment agreement. We'll start looking at some cases like that today. But without that kind of agreement, the party who's got time to perform needs to do the thing before they get paid for it. And I think it all makes a certain kind of playground good sense to us that if you pay somebody to do something and they don't do it, you don't have to pay them and then sue them for your money back. That would be crazy making. And in fact, was crazy making. That was the law under the old school English common law. And as we'll see in Jacobs and Young versus Kent, the courts are like, nah, we're not doing this. It just contravenes too much our playground instincts. If I'm going to offer you X, Y, if I'm going to offer you a quarter, if you're going to let me, if you're going to give me one of your extra sandwiches, and you don't, I don't have to pay you the money and then go complain to the teacher about it. Right? It's just like basic playground morality has sort of overruled the formalist constructions of the old common law. We do see, though, ways in which courts are going to talk about dependent and independent conditions in a way that pulls in that old common law but addresses it. So that's our first category. Our first category is fine, but what if I was paying somebody to do something and they didn't do that thing, or they did it very badly, right? I paid them to do landscaping and they drove a bulldozer into my house. Do I still have to pay them? The answer is no, but it's a little bit surprising why no. We take the breach of contract, the prior uncured material breach. We take that prior uncured material breach and we turn it into a condition of the other party's obligation to pay. Now notice, this is not your expectation measure of damages at all. This is a lot closer to our unjust enrichment measure of damages, right? What you want is, look, if you gave them money for something they didn't do, at the end of any just proceeding, they'd have to give it back. Does that make sense? And so all you're doing is not giving it to them in the first place. You're just sort of one step ahead of our unjust enrichment remedy for things that you've prepaid. What courts are doing here is they're trying to just get to the quick and dirty solutions. I get it. You might ask for your money back, then sue them for breach of contract. We'll see how that works in the UCC cases. It's really easy to see. You order a computer, it shows up cracked, you say, nope. One, I don't have to pay for it because I'm sending it back. And two, if I have to buy a computer from somewhere else at a higher price, I'm going to hit you for the cover cost, right? So we can see how this fits into the whole of our set of remedies. You're going to use that condition where you sent me a non-complying computer. A crack in it means that it at least violates the implied warranty of merchantability. Cracked goods aren't merchantable. So then when I send it back, I'm taking advantage of that condition, saying, nope, I'm calling this off. My performance is excused. I don't have to pay you, which is great because if I did, you'd just have to send the money back. And on top of that, then I'm going to sue you for the difference between my contract and the amount that I'm going to have to go pay somebody else for it. Or if I don't do it, for the amount that I would have to go pay somebody else for it if I had gone out looking for them, right? That's our 2712 to 2713 differential. So that's one way we can see how this all fits together. The other place we're going to look at then, the other set of implied conditions that excuse people's performance, are the zombie apocalypse. Right? They're acts of God. Now, you have to watch this because sometimes people will talk about an act of God clause or a force majeure clause. That is not, force majeure is just the French, Norman legal French for, superior force, right? Force that comes in from outside. The thing is, it's really confusing for young attorneys because those are not what we're talking about. A force majeure clause, an act of God clause, is the set of things that we thought about that we agreed on were going to let us out of the contract? Those are just express conditions, y'all. They're just straight up express conditions. Like if we think of it, and now that I've said it, don't think of purple elephants. But now that I've said it, you all have, right? What if there is a zombie apocalypse? Or what if there's a global pandemic? If we say that during the contract negotiations, and we say, well, okay, fine, if there's a global pandemic, or if there's a zombie apocalypse, or if aliens invade, then we will call the deal off under these circumstances. That's not an implied condition, that's an express condition. That's literally the thing we wrote down. So sometimes on the bar exam or on my exam, people get very confused because they think they're talking about act of God clauses, force majeure clauses. They're not. The kind of things we're going to talk about today are our second set of implied conditions. This is the list of things we didn't think to talk about. But if we had thought about them, we would have excused performance. Now the problem here is that by mentioning them, I'm taking a bunch of them off of your list. But then again, nobody really thinks, well, I mean, I don't know. We've all had a rough couple of years recently. I don't know that anybody really thinks the zombie apocalypse is going to happen, but at least you can see why you probably wouldn't waste the time negotiating about it in a force majeure clause. Like it might not happen, or something else is going to get us first, right? So the idea here is then that these commercial impracticability clauses, which we've seen before, we did frustration of purpose and impossibility back at the beginning of the class. That's okay. We're just coming full circle. These are the spiritual successors of those doctrines. And what they say is, cool, we don't just let contracts off the hook if something happens that nobody thought was going to, we don't just let people off the hook if something happens that the parties did think might happen, and so they wrote it into the contract. We also let them off the hook if something happens that they didn't think about, but we're like, yeah, that checks out. Like we're going to let you off the hook. Nobody saw that one coming. That's all cool. Those are our two big categories of implied conditions that let you off the hook. All right. Any questions about anything we've done in the entire class up through, we'll start with Taylor and we'll move into anticipatory repudiation and cure, but I wanted to get these basics down before we move into the cases for today. Any questions? Yeah.
I guess just touching on that before we get to it, and you can tell me to ask again later, but that just sounds so much like a defense for breach, right? But it's also a term, but it's like, to me that feels like crossing strings.
Yeah, it's less it is a defense to say, a defense can be anything, right? Yeah. It doesn't just have to be unconscionability. It can be, nope, there was an implied condition in our contract. It was implied in our contract that if aliens invade, we do not have to make milk deliveries, right? So that's a defense to say, it's a defense to breach of contract because they're saying you breached the contract. And your answer is no, there was a safety valve. I understand it wasn't an express safety valve. It was an implied safety valve, but it was still there. And that let me out. So it is a defense, full stop. Other questions? Yeah, Larry.
To clarify with the PNG construction,
Yeah.
so the non-breaching party wants to withhold their payment, they have to first communicate that and give them the opportunity to cure before they can withhold?
They don't. That's not the law. Any student of mine will, and that's why we spent time talking about it. Now, why would I say that? First of all, they don't. The black letter law of K&G, let's just go through it, is focused on Restatement 237 and then Restatement 253 and Restatement 241, which is material breach. And if you go through these, what K&G said was essentially, look, unless otherwise stated, promises are mutually dependent. You need to understand what dependent means. That is, my performance is dependent on you having performed. It's an important promise. If you don't do it, I don't have to. So most of these promises are dependent, and then there are a few independent, smaller ones that the court lays out, have some, for example, time for performance. We talked about that. How do you move a time for performance clause from an independent small, dinky promise to one that's major? Fly to New Zealand, no. Okay. You write it down in the contract, and we call that a? If you want to say when you do it, the time is important. Time is of the essence clause, which we mentioned last time. All right, so you put in a time of the essence clause, and that's how you move it from one category of independent, unless you say time is of the essence. It's not. It's an independent, dinky promise that keeps that old school common law tradition of saying, look, if I promise you a quarter for a sandwich and you don't give me the sandwich, I still have to give you the quarter and then sue you to get it back. Bananas, but that's how the old law was, and we keep that old law now in our law of independent conditions. There's two other types. The performance is a minor part of the overall consideration, or we expressly say that performance is independent. For those of you who take sales with me next year, check back with me. It's a big category, but not one we're going to be doing for this class. So those are our three ways of doing it. Time, dinky, or expressly agreed. All right. Now, then we have this whole list of what constitutes a material breach, and you can imagine it's just the kind of court navel-gazing we can come to expect. The extent to which the injured party will be deprived of a benefit that they expected. The extent to which the injured party will be adequately compensated for part of the benefit, and so on. You've been given the list, but that's what K&G then is going to really bear down on, is just saying what's a material breach. Now, to answer your question, nowhere in there was this dance of weaseling, nastygram, what's called reasonable assurances, which we'll do today. So they're weaseling, you send them a nastygram saying, hey, I think you're weaseling, I think you might not perform, I need adequate assurances. Then they say no, and then you say, okay, this has ripened into material breach. Since there was a problem and we raised it and you refused to fix it, this is now ripened into material breach. We are going to suspend our own performance. And the reason that dance is there, and you can see it in 269 and 26010 in the Uniform Commercial Code, and you can see it in the restatement as well. Courts love cure, which we're going to get into immediately after we start talking about this. Courts love cure because, of course, it keeps the problems out of court. The reason you do it, though, is because of something we saw in K&G, which was we talked about what happened when the client suspended their own performance, their own installation payment, their own installment payment in response to the bulldozer accident. And now the bulldozer accident, unfortunately, Valeria, that's the key feature that keeps your excellent question from being obvious, from having an obvious answer. Because the bulldozer is such a big, damn obvious disaster that of course they're the ones that screwed up, and of course they're the ones that have to make it right. But then we changed the hypo a little bit, and we said, well, what happens if they'd have driven it like into a corner, like into taken some paint off the wall, or plowed under one of your azaleas or something? And then we start to think, gee, is that really a material breach of the contract? And if you're not sure if it is, then remember that your own suspension of performance is likely to be a material breach of the contract. And so we do this dance that you're asking about largely out of practical concern, some legal. It makes your legal position stronger and stronger the more you give them a chance to get it fixed, and the more you document their failure to do so. It can only help you in court, right? But also, it does begin to protect you from this claim that you're the one that breached first, from that sort of no you. I didn't do it, you did it first kind of stuff. And that turns into a major, major threat in these cases, because remember, what we are talking about is not just suing for breach of contract. We're talking about suspending your own performance. And usually the way this works out, the performance that is suspended is payment. Right? It's almost always because the other person is the one who took time to do the thing. You're the one that's making that instant payment. And so usually you're saying, I am refusing to pay for something. And you can imagine how that plays in court. Right? They screwed up one little thing. You're like, I'm not going to pay for it. And we already saw that in Morin. Even Judge Posner does not love that. Begins to think, you know what? We think you're trying to get some work done for free. We think you're trying to game the system. And so to answer your question, the reason we do it is because it does improve your position, because it can begin to force this sort of weaselly anticipatory repudiation scenario where you're really not sure, like they haven't breached yet. You just are absolutely certain that they will. Because you've heard through the grapevine, they can't, for example, right? But they haven't said they won't yet, but you know they can't. And so can you see why you can't suspend your own performance yet because they haven't breached yet. And so that dance is a way of making that move less and less dangerous for you. All right, cool. Further questions? Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. For my buddy's a general contractor, and I brought this case up to him. So I didn't even know the legal rule behind it, but we never stopped paying. It was crazy for me to think that someone would try that. And I was
Yep.
like, well, here's a legal reason why.
Yeah, that's why. Yep, perfect. Love that the most. I'll take that to future classes.
I was going to ask about like unforeseen circumstances. So,
Sure.
for example, in 2025, a pandemic would be a court would say, well, if you really wanted pandemic protection,
Yep.
you should have written it in the contract. So they would say it's not a defense for a zombie.
Yeah, and that's the problem with commercial impracticability. As we'll see, here's the black letter law of commercial impracticability. It's the occurrence of a condition, the non-occurrence of which was a basic assumption of the parties to the contract. Well, are you and I assuming anymore that there won't be a global pandemic? Not sure we are, which means if we leave it out of our act of God clause, maybe the court won't treat it as an implied term in every contract letting them out. Now, in my personal view, although this litigation is ongoing, but in my personal view, prior to the 2020 pandemic, probably a global pandemic would be the occurrence of a condition, the non-occurrence of which was something that the parties, they just assumed that wasn't going to happen. It's not really worth negotiating over alien invasion. We assume that it hasn't happened already. I don't know. Right. But the idea here is that we're assuming that it's not going to happen, but those assumptions can absolutely change, Nate, and that's the whole point. Also, by the way, to the extent that you're interested in AI and whether or not it'll take your job, go ahead and try to code. Train an AI. Use a computer to accomplish the following task. Give me the list of all things that are not on this list. Enjoy. AI is not taking your job. All right. Any other questions on this stuff? Cool. Then let's move on to cure. All right, so cure, what I'm going to do is just kind of read off some stuff to you really quickly, give you the references. Valeria's question was a perfect recap of the law of cure, so we might as well just talk about that briefly. We need to know it before we get into anticipatory repudiation, which is where we are with Taylor versus Johnson, where the breach hasn't even happened yet, much less you have an obligation to let the other party cure. The thing you need to know is, under some circumstances, you are likely to have an obligation to let the other party try to fix the problem rather than simply call off the whole contract and treat it as done. Under Restatement 236.2, the victim may treat a breach as partial and suspend its own performance. And then 242 and comment A party's uncured material failure to perform when it is too late for performance or the offer to perform to occur also discharges the other party's duties. The one thing you want to watch out for, and this leads us into Taylor versus Johnson, the one thing you want to watch out for on cure, you have the right to say, hey, we expect you to fix it. That's a demand for cure. And in many circumstances, you have an obligation to let them try to fix it. The major place where you have to let them try to fix it is when there is still time for them to perform under the contract. They haven't breached yet. And that's really common, especially under the Uniform Commercial Code. And so when you take a look at 2508, which is the UCC's version of the rules that we see here in Restatement 236 and 242. When we do the Uniform Commercial Code, it actually says it. It says you have to give them an opportunity to cure if there is still time for performance under the contract. Watch out for that one on the exam. Okay, that's the basic framework of cure. You have a right to demand adequate performances, adequate assurances, and then if you do not get a response to those adequate assurances, you can call the contract off. That is going to be in 2609, 2610. That's going to be part of the dance that we see for anticipatory repudiation. All right, so that's where we're going to start. Anticipatory repudiation, we had a question about this last time, is where one party either expressly says they're not going to do it before the breach has happened, or it is clear to everyone that they can't do it. All right? They either say they're going to do it, it's express anticipatory repudiation, which never happens. If it does on the bar exam, like fine. By the way, if you think you're looking at express anticipatory repudiation on the bar exam, go look at what the person says and ask yourself, really? Really, did they say they weren't going to do it? Or were they just playing games with you and putting pressure on? So something like, let's say, this is one of my favorite examples from an upper level class. Let's say you agree to buy shingles for your house from a seller. And the seller then realizes that they can get a better price from someone else. And so they call you up, even though you've already concluded that contract. They call you up and they say, hey, I've heard from this other person who might want to buy these shingles, and I don't have enough shingles for both of you. So, quote, I guess this has become kind of like an auction for these shingles. I mean, you all know what I'm going to say. I guess this has become kind of like a lawsuit for failure to perform is what my answer would immediately be. You should probably have a less sharp tongue and maybe work with them. What might your response be instead of saying, I guess this has become kind of like a lawsuit? What would you say? Yeah, Nick.
I would say, are you saying that you're not going to perform?
Right, you're gonna push them on it. You're like, oh, okay, so we have a contract. Is what you're telling me you're not gonna perform? And you can even say more than that. One, this conversation is on the record. And two, we expect full performance. We expect delivery of the shingles on Wednesday. I don't know what else you're talking about. We expect delivery of the shingles on Wednesday. That's the kind of back and forth we're talking about. If you do think there's been express anticipatory repudiation, realize that the lawyer's best practice answer is going to be to put pressure on that and not just to go back to your client and be like, well, they called us up and they said, I guess this has become like an auction, so I guess they're not going to perform. Like, don't do that. Express anticipatory repudiation, you have to really force them to that point. And that really lays then our path down for the second prong of anticipatory repudiation, which is really the more powerful prong, which is to say they've put it out of their power to perform. It's not that they said they wouldn't perform. It's that you know, and it's not that you know they can't perform, it's that you know they can't perform. By the way, why do I add that extra level of security? Because if they haven't breached yet, and you don't know that they're not going to perform, then what happens when you say we're going to suspend our own performance and we're not going to pay you in turn? You have breached the contract and we're right back in our K&G scenario. You got it. Absolutely right. All right, cool. So that's where we are in this. Let's just open with a great example of this. Taylor versus Johnson is one of the very few cases that's in the book. It's just like, yeah, this is how the law works. It's great. Riley, if you take it away.
Cool. I liked all the horse names.
Yeah.
So there are some people who deal in the horse trade in California. They have two female horses named Sunday Slippers and Sandy Ford. Great names. They want to breed those horses to Fleet Nasrallah, harder name. They make the agreement in January of 1965 with the agreement that if a live foal is born to either or both of the horses, then the owner of the stud will receive $3,500 per horse. However, in December of that year, I believe, or October, I think it's December, they sell the horse to, no, it's October. I wrote down 10, and in my head, 10 always means death, but it's October of 1965. They attempt to breach and give notice. They're like, sorry, we're selling our horse to somewhere in Kentucky, so we want to get out of this. However, there's still the ability to to perform within the date range of the contract. And so instead of allowing the breach or trying to cover at that time, they actually send the 2 female horses out to Kentucky to breed, which is an implied term of all contracts that we can talk about. But they move them out there. One of the mares is not pregnant with foal, and eventually it goes into heat. But every time that it's in heat, they try to schedule to breed with the place that the stud is living, and they're unable to do it. Eventually, they breed her with somebody else for $10,000. The second mare finally gives birth to the foal that it is with. They attempt only once to breed that horse with this other stud that's out there, but the important thing is that they breed with the other stud before the 1996 deadline, and so the other side basically didn't actually have time to breach. And I think that's basically all the facts. But
Great. So let's just do a little bit of our usual kind of housekeeping here. First of all, what's this doing in the book?
What's this doing in the book? There's an implied term about repudiation. If somebody repudiates before the end date, if they can perform, they're sort of allowed to try to undo it. If you can make a plan, it's a way to cure.
It's a way to cure. So the idea here is we might talk about this as cure. Another way we might talk about it, remember in our remedies sections, we talked about alternative performance, substitute performance, accord and satisfaction. There's a number of different ways of saying, okay, look, the contract has been breached, but rather than let it all fall through, we are going to come to some kind of agreement to see if we can do something about it. And this is dealing with the doctrine of anticipatory repudiation and how it interacts with these promises. Okay, so then let's talk about our 2 kinds of anticipatory repudiation. What are our 2 kinds of anticipatory repudiation?
So there's the type where someone says they won't do something, and then there's the type where it absolutely can't be done.
Okay, the type that there's an express repudiation, which is an unequivocal refusal to perform. An unequivocal refusal to perform. Now, did we have an express repudiation in this case?
Initially, it sort of seemed like it, but they undid it basically.
Okay, so the answer is, and it's really important to track, largely for your learning purposes. There's very few teaching cases in this book. This is one of them. That is, there was an express repudiation, straight up. It is a textbook, bar exam express repudiation. They said they weren't going to do it. They canceled the reservation. That's a breach of contract. All right? So they straight up canceled it. They said there was still time to perform, but they canceled it before that time to perform came up. And so that means they have expressly repudiated the contract. But they didn't let it stick, did they? What did they do?
They basically negotiated away potential perform by sending the mares after the stud.
Right. So and it wasn't just that they sent the mares after the stud, right? What were the efforts here that show that they walked back, and who walked back that repudiation?
I think the owners of the mares walked back.
Yeah, the owners of the mares walked back the repudiation. Tell me why they might have walked it back.
Well, they clearly want to breed with this male.
Yeah, they'd worked out the genealogies. I'm not a horse person. I'm probably using the wrong words, but they'd worked out the thing, and this was the deal they wanted, and so they decided that they were going to try it anyway. So remember, they had an express repudiation in their back pocket, but they said instead, we're not going to sue you for breach of contract. We're going to accept this agreement, this alternative agreement, where you say that you will make the horse available for breeding for these mares. So they accepted substitute performance. Okay, fine. What happened to the substitute performance?
Well, I think there's some subtext here as I'm thinking more about the case. They sent the horse to Kentucky, where to breed with Shadow Guy, the other stud, it was $10,000. So chances are what happened was people recognized this first horse was very valuable, were able to sell it to a place where they would be able to spend.
Which is in fact what they did,
Yeah.
Exactly.
They sent it somewhere where it was more desirable, and so every weekend was busy. They couldn't set up a date night that worked for both parties.
Okay, why was every weekend busy? Leland.
They turned the horse into stocks and then 40 people that just had automatic reservation priority.
Yeah. So what they did was they sold it to an investment group, and the investment group was investing, not getting return on their investments. They were investing in being able to breed this horse to their mares, and as owners, yeah, it was a timeshare in horse breeding. But as owners, of course, they had priority. What about this promise, though, to let the original plaintiffs of this contract? What about the promise to let them breed to this horse?
Well, they basically try to fulfill that, but the promise is to the original owners, and it's not to the current horse owner.
Perfect.
They're not really incentivized.
Perfect. Do you see that? The people who own the horse now, if they get a call from the defendants in this case saying, hey, we promised these people that they would be able to breed to this horse, and it's looking like all the weekends are getting booked up. The response of the owners of the horse these days is that sounds like a you problem. I'm not the one that breached this contract. You sold me the horse. It doesn't have any trailing contractual obligations that put me on the hook for this. Maybe they worked out some side deal saying, yeah, we agree to accept your reservation, which they did. They said, yeah, we agree to accept this person's reservation as long as no member wants to use it. But come on, they don't have any obligation to do that whatsoever. And so it's looking increasingly like it's not going to happen. But what do we say about looking increasingly like it's not going to happen?
There was still potentially time to perform, and so the plaintiffs are sort of, or I guess I don't know which side is the plaintiff. The owner of the mares is in the wrong because they didn't wait long enough, right, for the contract to actually be breached.
Okay, that's where the case comes out. The owner of the mares now loses. They had this textbook case for anticipatory repudiation when their reservation was canceled. They walk it back, they accept the alternative. Notice that it's really looking through the mechanism that's been identified here, like the mares aren't going to get bred. It's really looking like it's not going to happen, but that's not enough. What do we need in order to say this second deal, the deal that they accepted when the original deal was breached? What do we need to say that the second deal has been anticipatorily repudiated? And first of all, let me ask you, why do we need anticipatory repudiation in this case? Because there's still time to perform. Because they still, if you got that phone call, because they still could do it, because this case has been brought before breach. So that's why we need anticipatory repudiation. Now, what kind of anticipatory repudiation are we looking at here for round two, not round one? Round one we know that's express anticipatory repudiation. What's round two? It's an implied anticipatory repudiation. What's our standard, Scott, for implied anticipatory repudiation?
That they put it out of their power to perform.
That they put it out of their power to perform, and why did they lose the case?
Because they didn't.
Because they didn't put it out of their power to perform. It was possible to perform. This is a profoundly unsatisfying result, especially for the owners of the mares, right? You might be thinking, hey, they are not the jerks in this case, and in fact, they are not the jerks in this case. What would you do if you were their attorney? Liam.
Maybe reliance damages?
Well, that's an interesting one, right? I would love to get reliance damages, your out-of-pocket costs, right?
Let's just wait a little bit longer and see when they actually breach.
Okay, so one, wait a little bit longer and see how they breach. What though, and I'll open this up, but I'll direct it to you, but open it up. What's your client likely to say to come back to say about that? Like in this case with these mayors saying, here's what you got to do because they still have time to perform. Look, I know. Every time you've booked, you get bumped by a member, right? What do you think?
What the mayor's owners would be saying?
Yeah, because they're your client, right? And you've just told them to wait to sue, which is great advice. But then what are they going to say?
These horses only have a limited time that they're able to be bred.
Yeah, like we're like TikTok, right? We're on the clock here. We can't just let this go and go and go. And so then I'm going to open it back up and say, yeah, okay, so now what? What's your response now? Like your client's putting pressure on you. We understand the black letter legal answer is, okay, just wait till they breach, then sue them. You get it. Yeah, Scott. Right? more pressure on them. And Skylar, could you describe what kind of pressure you'd put? Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to send a nastygram. By the way, your job as an attorney is primarily to send nastygrams. So this is a moment where you're going to learn the core of your profession. So you send mildly threatening emails. What are you going to send in your mildly threatening email?
I'd probably just, try to force the defendant, to, in some way, get the new owner, to try to perform in some sense. And
Right.
we're given a certain time frame, if they aren't able to agree at the end, they're gonna sue.
I agree. So what's your leverage here? Because they already know if they don't get it bred, you're going to sue. And you're going to win. Right? Tell you. So consequential damages are certainly one that I have found in my less generous moments raising. By the way, what's that sound like when a lawyer pops the consequential damages clutch? Knowing Hadley versus Baxendale. What language are you listening for on the phone? If you want to make sure the other party is increasingly on the hook for consequential damages. By the way, your contract can't have a consequential damages disclaimer, because if it does, you can't get them, right? Like, we get that. Yeah.
It's the time is of the essence, right? Like,
So you tell them what matters, and
you need to make them aware of what the consequential damages will be.
bingo. So it's the same thing with Hadley versus Baxendale, right? When time matters, time mattered for the crankshaft, time matters for getting the horses bred. You're like, look, this isn't some minor thing. This is a core of the question. And this is the damage that's going to flow on from that. And when they then begin to know about the damages that are flowing on from that, and especially if that's part of the contractual negotiation period, it's harder to do later on where you've already had the contract, but if you have the contract and there's no consequential damages limitation, you were going to get consequential damages anyway. You just need to make sure to start getting it on the record that they knew damn well at all periods what was going to happen if you weren't able to get these horses to breed in that very limited period of time that they had. So that's one part of what a nastygram might sound like. What more leverage can you have? Because like the whole point of I'm going to sue, I will say from a personal, practical standpoint, that is the lawyer's standard threat, and I find it to be profoundly unhelpful, even when you are going to sue. If you're going to sue, as a practice tip, what should you do? And I'm being so pedantic. This is such a jerk answer. Sue. If you're going to sue, it goes, you have been served. That's how that goes. Why? Why are you just, if you're going to sue, you do it. You don't threaten. Why? Yeah, Aiden.
Like in this case, they would probably just perform once they got served. They'd have more motivation
They'd have more motivation
to
to perform, although if that were true, like if that's entirely true, then Skylar's going to say, by threatening to sue, we're going to get what we want. And that's what a lot of lawyers who do not graduate from law schools as good as this one think that lawyers do all day. What they think is they think that their client comes in, has a problem, the lawyer picks up the phone and yells at people saying, largely, do you know who I am? Followed by, I'm going to sue. And then people get what they want. And I have to say, if that's how you've gone through life, you're living a profoundly different existence than I am. What happens when you threaten to sue somebody? Yeah. Yeah, they're going to do what they were doing before, and Leland?
They'll either ignore it or they'll get their own attorney.
Or they're going to batten down the hatches, right? You will be transferred out of customer service and to someone who is giving you a very different set of answers, right? So they're going to batten down the hatches. They're going to go defensive. They're also going to go offensive. It is, threatening to sue is the number one greatest, easiest way to get sued. Because they're like, we're going to get our narrative in play first. We're going to get our story in first. We're going to get some wind under this court's wings. We're going to mess stuff up. And so they're like drawing that. Look, when you sue them, this is also just for new attorneys, you're going to have to help clients who are going to get very much in their feelings about this. Even if you do sue, you're going to get countersued. And they're going to say things about you that you believe, or about your client, that your client believes are just absolutely like scurrilous rumors and like horrible and beyond. Like it's like talking to your ex about yourself. Like, you're just like, I don't know this person you're describing. Like, I was there and none of this is true. What's going on? You have to understand that's how humans work. We see the world in profoundly different ways. Even if you do sue, you're going to get countersued, right? Why would you do that ahead of time when all you're trying to do is increase pressure for them to perform? Okay, so back to it. What is your leverage here? If you're not saying, I'm going to sue because you've breached the contract, what is your leverage?
Do you still accept their repudiation?
You could just, well, you can't if you've already worked out a new deal. You can't go back and be like, okay, well, I'm going to ignore the new deal we had. I'm going to go back to the old deal, because obviously that's not fair to them. They realized they breached the contract, and so they negotiated with you for substitute performance. Now, the fact that they're going to weasel out of that substitute performance too means that they're jerks, but but they haven't done it yet is our problem. So you can't go back to the original deal yet.
I guess you'll just renegotiate a third contract, maybe settling it, just getting everyone out.
Which is what they want to do. But if Skylar wants to perform, if you want to renegotiate to let everybody out and just undo the deal, you can imagine that the defendants in this case would be pretty happy about that, right? That's going to be a real win for them. The problem is, Laura, what's that do for your clients? Nothing, right? Like they want the horses, like they want little horses. That's their deal. So what do you do? Yeah.
Try and find us a buyer for the baby horse.
Oh, now you're talking. So now we're bringing in other parties that have pressure within the scenario. What does that do? If you've got, this is the same thing that Talia said, if you show them a forward contract you have on a horse by one of these mares with Fleet Nasrallah, what's that do? Yeah, right? Like you're like, look, I now have forward contracts that are going to be breached as a result of your breach. That's a nice way to ratchet up the consequential damages. No, I think the question I'm insisting on is a little bit of a jerk question because it's just what we're doing today. What are we doing today? Yeah.
Are you asking for adequate assurance?
Yeah.
And then saying if you don't give it to us, we're
Yeah, and describe how adequate of assurances is different from, we're going to sue.
It's saying like your conduct has indicated that you're probably not on call during performance, and we need you to take certain steps to indicate that you're going to perform. Otherwise, we will take it as a breach.
Brilliant. And what do those other steps look like? What's the key feature of those other steps? Because you're saying like, look, we need adequate assurances. Here are things, here's what we need. But of course, what do you need under this contract? Performance, right? But that's not what the adequate assurances are. So what do you need? Scheduled times, that would be a pretty good one. Get me a time. But the problem is then the response is, well, we had scheduled times. You keep getting bumped by the members.
It said in the book that both the buyers each reserve 3 shares, and they can give them the shares and have them reserve the time for the shares.
Okay, security or bond, right? What you're looking for is to say, I need to see pain out of you. If you're not doing what you promised to do under the contract, it is really common to do something like with the shares or simply getting a policy that says, if I do not perform, then this will pay damages. Getting a bond, putting up collateral, right, is the standard one. If you say, I don't think you're going to pay this debt, I need adequate assurances. I'm going to need this much in collateral, and I'm going to need it. What's the second factor here? So it's got to be something that's going to secure performance. It's not performance itself. Do you see that? Your adequate assurances are something that is going to secure performance, that's going to give a sense that they will perform. It's going to secure performance, not necessarily perform, because if they were just going to perform, fine, then they're out from underneath the whole thing and they haven't breached the contract. They've straight up cured. End of story, no lawsuit, right? So when you're looking for adequate assurances, you're saying, here's something that's going to make me feel, and I mean feel in my bones because I already don't believe you, feel in my bones that you're going to do what you said you were going to do. And that often takes some form of security or collateral. It's absolutely right. Okay, what else do you need from this adequate assurances? I heard somebody say something. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm hallucinating now. Yep.
This is slightly more of a question. So with that framework in mind,
Yep.
do you need the adequate assurances to be worth in theory more than the performance?
Or what you need is for them to be reasonable under the circumstances. What's reasonable? Look at our industry custom and practice. You need to be reasonable under the circumstances of the kind that would secure performance, right? So for example, if it's a construction project and they're not getting it done, and you say, hey, it looks like you're not going to build the building, I need adequate assurances, then something like a construction bond, right? Like just that is standard in the industry that would secure performance if the person doesn't perform. That would be the kind of adequate assurances that would be accepted in the industry to get that off the hook. What else do you need from these things, though? And if you were looking for it, just like stop being lawyers for a second. You've got a contract, they're not doing it. You want to get them to perform, you want to increase leverage. The problem is if they wanted to perform, they'd already be performing. So you need some other security or some other reason to increase your confidence that they're going to do it.
Don't you need like a time frame for
There it
when
is.
assurance has to be provided?
Tell me all about that. And the time frame turns out to be the most important thing for the whole deal.
Yeah, because I mean, you're already not doing what you're asking them, so like logically, you're gonna ask them for more. You're gonna set a time.
Yeah.
Because you really don't think they're gonna do it.
Okay, so you ask them for something that would actually make you secure that they're going to do it. And you mostly, because they're not going to do it, you mostly put a reasonable timeline on it, a deadline. Now, what does that deadline do practically in these cases of anticipatory repudiation? Yeah. It moves up the time. It lets you say, look, I gave you our little cure dance. I let you have the opportunity to fix this before the time for performance came. Under the UCC, they still have a unilateral right to cure, like up until the time for performance. But if they refuse to give you adequate assurance, then you can essentially move your timeline up to the time that is stated in your demand for adequate assurances. So you are doing what Schuyler said. You're turning up the heat. But I need you to see you're not just saying we're going to sue for breach of contract. Everyone knew that was on the table to start. That wasn't the question. The question is there anything we can do about it now to turn up the heat with respect to saying, look, you need to make me secure that you're going to do what you promised, and you need to do it within a time frame that you're going to force non-compliance or compliance within a time frame that then allows you to act and go ahead and rebook the mares with someone else. Because of course, the problem of the owners of the mares in this case is, let's say they had engaged in a cover transaction. Let's say that they had gone and gotten the mares bred elsewhere. Then what happens? Yeah, then their mares aren't available to breed, and like they either have to pay the fee or not get the fee back, or they themselves are in breach of contract, right? Like they've just given up the value of the... So they're really up against it. What I love about this case is it really makes it clear not just how anticipatory repudiation works, but the pressures from the client side that really drive how you're going to act as a lawyer, and why, by the way, your nastygram is probably not going to say, we're going to sue. Your nastygram is probably going to say, hey, here's our evidence for insecurity as to whether or not you're going to perform. We need the following standard responses within the industry to secure your performance. If we do not receive those assurances at this particular point, we will treat your behavior as having matured into breach of contract. And we will suspend our own performance. And that's, by the way, the same thing we were doing that Valeria was pointing out. Valeria was dealing with it after the contract had already been breached. But I just need you to see it's the same dance before the contract has even been breached. It's the same set of legal moves. Any questions on anticipatory repudiation? Okay, I got Liam then Nate. Yeah.
Can you elevate a non-material breach with an assurance?
Yeah. He says with a drawn-out syllable. Look, if it's not a material breach, then you can't suspend your own performance. That's what lets you do it. To be clear, 237, the big one, says it is a condition of everyone's obligation to perform under a contract that there be no prior, uncured, material breach of contract. You don't get to suspend your own performance. You literally have to still pay up Just pay up a little less. Let's try it. Let's say instead of breaking the whole contract in this case and selling the horse to somebody else, they just moved the horse from Kentucky to Tennessee. And they were still willing to honor the obligations, but you now have to ship the mares from Kentucky to Tennessee. Can you call off the contract? Probably not. Can you pay them the amount you promised minus the transportation costs to Tennessee and be like, sue me if you don't like it? Yeah, probably. Like, that's how that's going to work out. Okay, if that's true, then why did I say, yeah, I like your instincts as a lawyer? Can you use this process to take a minor infraction and grow it into a major infraction? You absolutely can. Tell me how and why.
I mean, if you're going to turn up the heat on them and say that this is part of now your reliance damages or whatever else, just say this is going to have to come out of their pocket.
Right? What are you going to do to move this thing? Look, that's because we're all making an analytic error. It's a great question, to be clear. You're not making the analytic error. But there is an analytic error that's sort of hidden. Is the breach of a contractual condition material or not material? Oh, you think the clouds part? You think there's like a decision? It was material. Yeah, this is why the bar exam is bullshit, because they're asking you these questions as if there's an answer to it. What am I really going to say about it?
Who's paying me?
Yeah, who's paying me, right? And where can we move this lever? So what are you going to do if the materiality of a breach is not a fact of the universe given from on high, but is a legal determination made after persuasive argumentation that you yourself will be involved in? Okay, I've got Talia, then Riley.
If it's in the contract, then it's material, and if I ask for assurances, then it's really material.
You start building. So if it's in the contract, it's material. Is that true? It depends, right? So what are your arguments? If it's in the contract, first of all, if it's in the contract, is that a good sign or a bad sign for materiality? This is a great sign for materiality, right? Like Talia is not wrong. So how do you say? What do you say? We've actually been through the rules today. How do you say? Yeah, okay, it's in the contract, and it's not. It's in the contract. Give me the three things that can be in the contract, though, that do not make it material, that aren't material. We just did this, y'all. Mike. Time. It's not a time. It's in the contract. Talia says it's not time. And it's not dinky, isn't it? But that's our lever pull. That's our argument. That's our argument, right? What we're trying to do is we're trying to make the case in the adequate assurances process. We are trying to build it from dinky to non-dinky. That is what my answer is. You said, can you do it? My answer is yeah. By doing your job as an attorney, not by discovering that an immaterial term lets your client suspend their own performance. It can't. If the court decides that the term is immaterial, then your client can't suspend their own performance in return. That's straight up black letter law. But what you can do is increase the odds that the court deems this to be material and not immaterial, and that's where we start getting into Talia's argument. So it's not time, it's not dinky, and it's not expressly made independent. That's our third category. And so if it doesn't fit into one of those categories and it's in the contract, pretty damn good evidence that it's material. The point is, yes, you can build it during this process, just like you can build your case for consequential damages. You can't establish your case for consequential damages. The damages do need to be foreseeable at the time of the making of the contract. But you can sure as heck start piling wood on that fire and kerosene on that wood as part of this same deal. Now there's one, the question is so good. The question is so good, I do want to give you a very basic practice tip for when you need Liam's question. And this has to do with testing of technological systems, primarily in computer engineering, especially with new computer systems. Now, as anybody may have determined, if you buy a new computer system, let me just ask you this. How long does it take you to figure out whether this computer system is a good fit for you? A couple hours? A day? Well, that's the perfect tender standard, and that's where I'm going with this problem. So your requirement to reject or accept it, boom, right as soon as you get it, right? but yet it takes you a while to figure this out. Anybody have a computer system that just royally bit them in the rear, you know, like months later? Just like, what was that? Yeah, Nate? Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
The last iOS update has made my computer so much worse.
Right? Or ChatGPT 5, which is just a complete disaster, or like software gets squirrely all the time. And here's the problem. The first time you run into a problem, for example, I am a gamer. One of the things that I need a computer to do is in the middle of a raid, for those of you who know, you know, in the middle of a raid, I need that sticky keys notification to not come up and block me from access. Like, would you like me to turn on sticky keys? And the answer, as a matter of law, is no, never turn on the sticky keys ever, ever again. Ask me how I know this happened this morning. All right, never turn on sticky keys when I am trying to heal a raid ever, ever again. Ever, don't do it. And then it does, and you can't turn it off, and you do turn it off. You engage in YouTube videos, and you're like, okay, this is how I turn it off. And it's like, nope, they just disabled that capacity. You can't actually turn it off. This is pretty typical. I'm making a joke, but this is pretty typical of these kinds of systems. And the difficulty here is that these kinds of problems are a death of 1,000 cuts. And so when you're trying to work on anticipatory repudiation or on a breach of contract claim, where the problem is that the issue is something that the first time you run into it, it's not that big of a deal, which means you accept the computer and you keep working on it, right? But then the problem grows over time and eventually becomes unlivable. Those are the kinds of cases that practically happen every day, where the breach is an accumulation, is a death of 1,000 cuts. And that's where this nasty gram practice really, really matters, because the first time that frickin' sticky keys thing went off, was that a material breach of contract? No. Does it justify suspending payment on a quite expensive gaming computer? No, I'm not going to suspend payment on that, right? Do you see it? Like the 80th time, if we took it seriously, if it were something worse than sticky keys, right? Like if it was a real problem, like a data leak, these happen all the time. Can you see how like the 80th time, the 1,000th time, you're going to start going, yeah, this is just not working. And so you need this nasty gram practice to upgrade it. Now this happens less in anticipatory repudiation because that would happen, anticipatory repudiation happens before the computer even gets to your doorstep. But it does happen all the time where the problem is dinky, and the problem is that dinky plus dinky plus dinky plus dinky plus dinky plus 1,000 times dinky starts being unlivable. And at that point, you're going to need this nasty gram practice to package all this up and call them on it and say, look, get your sticky keys fixed, he says to the internet. Get your sticky keys fixed because this is not playable. All right. Great question. Took a little detour on it. Any other stuff before we move off of this? Because we need to move on. Yeah.
I was going to just say that, so it sounds like when you're dealing with this kind of anticipatory repudiation, you have to make like a click.
Yeah.
Nasty gram. So you can click it, the cuts into one. And then also, it sounds like because you're anticipating litigation, you need to have evidence so the court will decide in your favor because it's not going to be clear-cut breach of contract.
Right, and so you're going to start with your framing. Remember all of these narrative framings? Your nasty grams are going to be exhibits in your complaint. They're going to be part of your affidavit. Write them as if you're the judge reading them later and going, okay, these people were given every chance to get it right. Right? That's what you're doing with these things. You're not saying I'm going to sue. You're writing something that opposing counsel is going to read and go, oh man, I wish my client hadn't received that. They know a lot of things now that I really wish I could claim later on that they didn't know. This is really raising the risks here. Maybe we need to do something about that.
In that case, would you want your nasty grams to also include as much information on your side as possible, like deciding like exactly when the contract was formed, exactly when it was formalized?
I mean, sometimes you get formal on this stuff, but usually you can say those things in your statement of facts. You need to use your nasty gram to ratchet up the specific pressure on this breach. That's what you want to describe. You want to describe what they're doing wrong or why you have grounds to seek adequate assurances. You need to establish those grounds. That's what's going to go into the nasty gram in the anticipatory repudiation situation. Or if it's already a breach and you're just talking about how material was the breach, then you're going to be talking about the breach in a collective way that moves it from a death of 1,000 cuts into one big insurmountable problem that they need to get fixed. Okay, Let's move on. We're going to have to move fairly quickly through some of these, but you know, life is. So then we're going to talk about Kuhnian. And yeah, we'll do Kuhnian. John, would you mind setting up Kuhnian for me, please?
Sure. So the plaintiff is a supplier of plumbing and heating materials. The defendant, DCA, is a developer constructing a large low-income housing project. The parties had an installment contract for Merowitz to deliver materials as ordered by DCA, with payments due on a specific monthly schedule. DCA begins falling behind on payments, and by November 69, they were in debt or behind on payments by about $38,000. So this has gone on for quite some time. There's this meeting in December where Merowitz insists on payment. DCA pays a small fraction of what they owe, but promises that more payments are coming, so long as Merowitz will continue supplying them with these materials on credit, essentially. So Merowitz continues to deliver, relying on that promise, but they receive no further payment. Then in January, DCA starts buying supplies from a totally different company. So DCA has this confrontation with Merowitz where they demand that they get the rest of the materials they're owed, and Merowitz at this point replies that they're not doing anything else until they get the funds in escrow. They need that assurance because they've got plenty of reason to believe that DCA is not good for it.
Perfect. In fact, you've already hit the key features of it. Let me just ask you this, what's it doing in the book?
It's kind of the solution to the weasel problem, right? It's here they did have a good faith reason to believe that they wouldn't get what they were owed, and they made a specific demand with a reasonable time frame attached.
Okay, so they made a specific demand, they had a reasonable time frame attached. Those are exactly the scenarios that we've been talking about in our nasty gram practice. I do want to talk about, though, what I love is that you picked out the key parts of the case that have nothing to do with the law. What was the single factor that made you go, okay, I know how this case turns out? And you mentioned it, but like you just read it and you're like, yeah, look, I know who loses.
The fact that they bought, for me, it was the fact that they bought supplies from a different company while they were in this standoff with someone they owed, 5 figures to.
That's a pretty good one. What's going on with that? Oh, go ahead, Laura.
Or I was going to say the fact that they went bankrupt in the middle of it.
The fact that they went bankrupt in the middle of it? Although we do have to, those two are connected, right? They're clearly in distress. What do we say about bankruptcy? This is an important practice tip. Do we say that bankruptcy is adequate reason for insecurity? No. Okay? Such a great point. Let's take a quick segue. Why not? Because look, if your contractual counterparty is going bankrupt, how do you feel about whether they're going to keep your contracts? You do not feel good about this, right? So, what's that?
They made the promise.
They made the promise. Why is it that we generally, and this is a rule, and it's a rule that will be on the bar, why is it that we do not let you call off anticipatorily all contracts made by a company that enters insolvency? Yeah. Because you don't anticipate going bankrupt, but nobody anticipates not performing, or theoretically they shouldn't anticipate not performing at the time of the making of the contract.
Can it be discharged to you personally? Like, you become liable yourself?
You can, although boy, do you not want that. You really want the corporate form. We all love the corporate form. All us lawyers love the corporate form because that limitation on liability is where we make our meat and drink, right? You want the company to go under. You don't want people losing their houses. So personal would be rough. Like it's true, they could stand as a guarantor to the loan personally, and they often do in bankruptcy, but yeah.
So just because they can't pay off all of their debts after
Yep.
bankruptcy doesn't mean they can't pay off yours.
Perfect. Just because they can't meet all of their contractual obligations doesn't mean that they can, which is what the definition of insolvency and bankruptcy is. The definition of insolvency and bankruptcy is literally your inability to pay your debts as they come due. But it doesn't mean you're not paying everybody. It just means you can't make all of your obligations as they come due. And why do we then let bankrupt companies decide we're going to breach these and we're going to keep these contracts when they enter in some kinds of bankruptcy. A dissolution bankruptcy, there you're just like, okay, we're done here. We're going to dissolve the entire company. It's going away now. We'll just gather up all the money that it's got and distribute a few pennies to each of the creditors. That's not the question I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of bankruptcy where, like the airlines, who are like bankrupt every other year now. Yeah.
Because you're letting them decide what contracts are most subjectively valuable to them.
Right. You're letting them decide what contracts are valuable because the purpose of bankruptcy isn't necessarily to destroy the company. It's to help it, rehabilitate it, get it back out of its financial difficulties. Why? Why would we do that as a society? Is it because we're nice? Right. It's literally inefficient. For example, if you ever asked yourself, why these airline companies that are always in bankruptcy, why these airline companies continue to operate and why their creditors encourage them to continue to operate, even while everyone knows they can't pay their creditors back, why would you do that? Look, if you owed somebody money, if somebody owed you money, if somebody owed you a lot of money, do you want them to have a job or not? Okay, now, let's be clear. Their job is not enough to pay back what they owe you. Do you want them to have a job or no job? You see it? On the efficiency grounds, like given where we start, you don't want to just destroy the entity because it owes more money than it can pay. The whole point is, look, have it earn as much as it can for the people that it owes, not put it away immediately. So we do have to watch it on this anticipatory repudiation front. Why did we do this segue? Because they love on the bar exam, and they love in practice to ask whether you can treat contracts as anticipatorily repudiated when the other party enters insolvency. And the answer as a matter of law is you absolutely cannot. And in fact, you are violating a court order if you do. You didn't know this. There's an automatic court order. The court doesn't sign it. It's automatic. It's called the automatic stay. There's an automatic court order that goes into place when somebody files for bankruptcy, and what it says is nobody move. Nobody move. Nobody can seek damages from this company. Nobody can call off their contract. Nobody move. The court is now taking over the economic life of this company. And so you are violating that injunctive relief. You are violating the automatic stay if you rush to the courthouse and try to get your stuff out first. All right? So that's one real quick segue down here. The fact they were buying it from somebody else is a great signal of problems. Why were they trying to buy it from somebody else? What's that? Yeah, because they can't get the stuff from somebody else, and they can't get the stuff from somebody else because they're not paying for it, right? So that just makes them look worse and worse. I'm still looking for the key driver for the thing that we've seen in a lot of cases. Jake, yeah.
Because they said they'd only pay the money they owed if they continued to get future deliveries.
Well, they tried that again. What happened the first time when they got called on the carpet? Because they did that the second time, right? You're right. They did. They said, look, we're only going to do it if we're only going to pay if you deliver everything. Well, you have a track record. We don't believe you. We're not going to deliver everything and have you not pay for it. That's insane. What happened the first time?
They paid some.
They paid some in response for a promise, right?
They promised to pay the rest
so long as they got the new materials. Where else have we, look, completely different area of law, right? But where else have we seen that fact pattern? There's a bump in the road, the parties come together, they renegotiate a new deal, and it's that fact that drives the whole case. The court's like, look, we understand things happen, but you came up with a new deal. We're not letting you do this double bookkeeping bullshit. Yeah, right.
It's Mid-South and Rizzo.
Yeah, it's Mid-South and Rizzo's all over again. Theme of the course, thou shalt not engage in double bookkeeping on the court's time. The court is real tired of this by this point. And I think that sort of progression of events is what drives this particular case. I don't think the case is otherwise all that interesting. It is simply this. If you owe on an installment plan and you don't pay on an installment plan, the other party has reasonable grounds to believe you won't pay and so can suspend deliveries. It's not rocket science. What's interesting is to see the practical impacts of what happens as a company enters bankruptcy, put a star, take into the bar exam. Insolvency is absolutely not grounds for treating a contract as anticipatorily repudiated. It is a matter of law, not. So take that, and also take the double bookkeeping stuff that we've seen in a couple of other cases. Yeah, Lucas.
So if that company is going bankrupt, you basically have to keep performing until they stop performing?
Or you can apply to the court for relief and say, hey, wait, I don't have to make additional deliveries, but I can't treat the contract as being called off. That's often the balance that you make. But what you can't do is call the whole contract off. You can say, hey, I'm going to suspend my performance until you agree to come back. But what you can't do is just say, you have repudiated the contract. You can't do that because the power that a bankrupt entity gets in bankruptcy is the ability to pick and choose among its contracts and say, we're going to keep this one, we're going to keep this one, we're going to keep this one. We're going to breach this one, and breach this one. For the ones that are breached, then we owe them money, but that money is likely to be discharged in bankruptcy, right? They're going to have to get in line with Oliver Twist and the rest of them saying, please, sir, can I have some more? And in bankruptcy, the answer is no, you don't get any more. And so those people, all those breached contracts become unsecured credit. They get shunted away, they get sent away. But the contracts that you kept, you keep on as full-on contracts, and you have to pay them. That decision is the core of keeping a company alive through bankruptcy, and so courts will reserve that process for the bankruptcy process. They won't let parties just call it off. Okay? Cool. And you can also petition the court for relief from the automatic stay, which is the immediate thing you should do. Just say, look, I need relief from the automatic stay. They are asking me to make deliveries, and it's clear they haven't paid me to date, so I need relief from the stay. They usually need relief from the stay if they have possession of things that you've sent them and they haven't paid for yet, and under some circumstances, you get to take those back, and that's a really valuable remedy for you as a seller. Okay, sweet. I think that's all we've got for Kuhnian. Let's move into the big one, Jacobs and Young's versus Kent. And Austin, if you wouldn't mind setting that one up for me, please.
Jacob and Young's build a country residence for the defendant for $77,000. The construction is done in June, the defendant moves in, and then the following year in March, the defendant finds out that some of the pipe used in the construction of his home is not made by the manufacturer he contracted for, Reading. And so the plaintiff was directed by the architect at that time to replace the pipe, but can't because it's encased in the walls of the home. And in order to replace the pipe, they'd have to destroy a significant part of the structure. So the plaintiff says, yeah, I can't do that, and also you owe me for the remaining balance due, and the defendant refuses to pay, so the plaintiff sues. I think the rest of the case is just about trying to figure out if the pipe that was actually used in the construction of the home is an independent or dependent promise within the contract.
Mm-hmm. Well done.
So if it's dependent, that means that, kind of like what the dissent says, the defendant contracted for it, therefore he should get it.
Yep.
And this is technically a breach of contract. But Cardozo says that it's more independent because the purpose served by the pipe and the desire to be gratified, and the excuse on Jacobs and Young's behalf for deviation is justifiable, and it's not really a material breach of the contract, so the damages should be the difference in value of the pipe, and since the pipe used was pretty much the same as the pipe the defendant wanted, there are no damages.
There are no damages. Okay, brilliant exposition. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with the basic housekeeping stuff. What's this doing in the book?
It's distinguishing between independent and dependent promises in a contract, and when dependent promises can become independent.
Right, so it's distinguishing between dependent and independent promises in the contract. Remember, independent in modern law means dinky or agreed to be independent, right? Dependent means a big deal, such a big deal that you doing it, that me performing is dependent on you doing it. That's what dependent means, an independent means. And you're right, that's what's going on in the case. The case is about this move from the old English common law where contractual promises were by and large considered to be independent of each other. And now we've moved to a new system where pretty much all important promises other than dinky, time, or we said it, are material and therefore grounds for dependent. So that's one part of what it's doing here. It's also got some comments about like what's material, right? This is one of the sources of the language in the restatement talking about what material is. Jacob and Young is one of the major cases talking about what is material and what's not material. And so then give us your cleanest statement of the black letter law. Like just what's this doing in the book? This is one of these old cases that's there to establish a principle so that you can move on and learn it as it evolves in the law later on.
Yeah, the rule that I took out of this case is that some conditions, though dependent, can become independent when their departure is insignificant.
Right.
Or when the cost to cure is grossly out of proportion of the good attained.
Right. So an omission both, quote, trivial and innocent, for example. Now, let's be clear. Was the contract breach?
Yes.
Okay, cool. If the court does not treat this as a condition excusing performance, what performance is sought to be excused here?
The substitution of the type.
What performance is sought to be excused? Payment, right? The guy's trying to get out of paying, all right? Which means you're already in a real bad posture for this particular scenario. Okay, so the guy's trying to get out of paying. And what they're saying is certain small violations aren't grounds for undoing the deal, letting the party not pay, getting out of it and not paying. Hey, by the way, since you've done a lot of studying already and since you've read ahead and since we've already talked about the various standards, can anybody give me a very common place in the modern law where we're just like, nah, we don't use Jacob and Young's versus Kent. If there is any flaw at all, we call it off. Perfect tender, 2601. That's the standard when you get goods under the UCC. When you first get them, we are not Jacobs and Young's versus Kenting around here. Any flaw, perfect tender. What does it do? Excuses the obligation to pay. 2601 is the opposite of Jacob and Young's, and you just need to stare at them until you see that, until you understand what's going on in Jacob and Young's and what's going on in perfect tender, and then be like, oh, wow, whoa, 2601 is actually an example of the old common law. Doesn't matter. Is it a crack? Does it matter? Let's try this. I wanted to order. Now, the way this happened was my very, very kind spouse actually got the MacBook for me from Costco when I said I needed one for my business. And she was like, oh, I'm going up. I'll go get it. And she came back, and I had not expressed the fact that I wanted the steel gray thing because it was going to match my iPhone because I've got problems that way. And instead, she came back with a blue one, right? Okay, now let's try that. If I had ordered, this is not true, I'm not going to malign my spouse, but if I had ordered a steel gray one, titanium gray or whatever they call it, titanium silver, because it's Apple, they like got to make up special words. So if I had ordered a titanium silver computer and had gotten a blue one, do I have to pay for it? I do not. Perfect tender. Is it a material breach of contract if they have sent me a blue, like, do you think I have problems using the blue one? It's not like red ones are faster, right? Like, I mean, it's just blue. That's all there is to it. It would not meet our later standards, for example, for revocation, which is the substantial impairment standard. It does not meet that standard. Sorry, it does not fall afoul of that standard. That's fine. I can't recover. If I accept it, if I use it for a couple weeks, I can't return it by saying, you know what, I really wanted titanium silver. Like, I can't do that. So we get both standards in the code. We get 2601, which is perfect tender when you first get it. And then we get a much more Jacob and Young's versus Kenty scenario called substantial impairment once we keep it for a while and we're saying, okay, yeah, but now I'm aware that a problem has occurred and so I want to send it back. I want to revoke my acceptance. Right? And if I try to revoke my acceptance, we use a Jacob and Young's versus Kent kind of analysis. So I did want to make that connection clear. All right, cool. So we now know that small, minor, we might almost call them immaterial, breaches of contract do not give rise to this condition. And that is essentially then the other black letter law of Jacob and Youngs versus Kent. It is another part of the material part of my statement. It is a condition of each party's obligation to perform that there be no prior uncured material breach of contract. And what they're saying here is that a dependent promise can become independent if the violation is dinky. Well, that's just part of the dinky component, right? That's saying it's got to be dinky if we're still going to make you perform. All right. Now, there's one last level thing here. Why does the court do what it's doing, right? Like, I mean, what the dissent's kind of got a point. Tell me a story, change the facts of the hypo, you can make whatever you want, in which it's obvious that the screw up, even though it's equivalent, is just not going to obligate the person to pay.
If there were lead pipes, I'm not sure.
Well, let's try to say, well, if they were lead pipes, right? So if they were lead pipes, everybody's clear on this, like, lead and gas destroyed a generation? Okay. So like that's bad. Lead pipes not cool, right? But we need to sort of move. Let's try something where, does this case remind anybody of anything? Different doctrine, but we're now getting to the same currents of commonality underneath.
This kind of reminded me of, I think it was double A when they ordered one type of insulation device and they got another type.
Right, so they
Ended up fighting them in the.
Yeah, they ordered one type, they got another. The question is, are these things substitutable or not? Straight up, are they substitutable or not?
Yeah.
Anybody in your personal life have a place where you're like, these things are not substitutable?
Coke versus Pepsi.
Coke versus Pepsi. I was just going to say it. You saved me the time.
Hands, man.
What's that?
I mean, if you bring me a Pepsi, I'm going to throw hands.
Yeah, exactly. All right, see, look, I'm glad we've got a lawyer here because as a matter of law, Pepsi is not okay. Let's just remember that. I'm going to put it on the exam one of these days. As a matter of law, Pepsi is not okay. What am I getting at? What's Coke versus Pepsi? Like if I order a Coke and you bring me a Pepsi, am I justified in saying, yeah, no, absolutely not? Yeah, sure. Give me other, wow, this is weird then. Because like in one case, you can swap out the type of pipe, but in another case, you can't even swipe out the type of soft drink. What's this beginning to feel like, to sound like? Because there's another case I'm really digging for here. Yeah. Morin, tell me all about Morin. This is Morin.
Well, it really didn't make a difference what the walls looked like in the factory. And the new ones that were installed looked exactly the same. They had the same defects.
So they were equivalent because of a factory deal, but then we talked about that. Give me a scenario in which the kind of wall that they put on a building absolutely is going to give me an aesthetics approval clause. Talia. Residential, why? It's because it's my own, it's my personal. Where am I going with this? Aesthetics, right? That these are our aesthetics approval clauses. This is similar to an aesthetics approval clause. By the way, it's not an aesthetics approval clause because it's inside the wall, which turns out to be demonstrative. Yeah?
It's your personal subjective.
It's your personal. I'm playing for that subjective versus objective silo. We're right back at it. Hey, remember PV House? Remember our question in PV House? What were the damages in PV House for that post-apocalyptic hellscape that Garland turned the back 40 into? What were the damages? $300 beeping dollars. You have to put the beep in there just because otherwise you don't get it. $300? $300. Where did the court get off saying the damages were $300?
They got that because apparently the total cost of the land itself only decreased by $300.
And how is it measuring that? Market value, which is objective, well done, right? What's the other way that it could have measured it? Cost to repair. Why would we have done, what would that have been?
For the value to the owners of the land.
Yeah, the cost to repair, to put it back in that pristine condition, right? Bambi sort of gambles out of the forest, da, 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 right? Like to get to that point, you need the cost to repair. That stood in for the subjective value of the property. It's the same thing here, right? When we're asking whether or not this pipe is okay to make a switch or not, you need to not just believe, not just to believe what the courts are saying in this stuff. You need to read this and go, yeah, but Pepsi's not okay. And I need to know why Pepsi, as a matter of law, is not okay. And it's related to this subjective versus objective break. It's related to the same questions we had before about repair versus market difference. We've seen this over and over and over and over again in the class, where we're using a market price now to determine, or commercial context. Market price is just another way of saying commercial context. Morin is commercial context, right? Commercial context goes one way, residence goes another way. Weintraub versus Krobach. Commercial context goes one way, residential goes another way. Specific performance. Portraits go one way, landscapes go another way, right? Once you see that lens, you're like, oh crap, I can start sorting cases that otherwise seem to me to be absolutely contradictory, and this is another one of them. Okay, now, why can't we treat this as an aesthetics approval clause? This guy asked for Reading pipe. We don't believe him subjectively, just like we didn't believe the manager in Morin.
Because most of the pipe is obscured.
Right, because the pipe is inside the wall. We can't see it. It's a textbook for not treating it like an aesthetics approval clause. Is there anything in this case that says aesthetics approval clause? None. Zip, zero, nada. Is it the same rule? Yeah, it's the same rule. Transposed into a different framework. They didn't say, hey, this is an aesthetics approval clause, which we only approve if it is commercially reasonable, but in personal and residential cases, we approve full stop. We didn't do that. We just said, yeah, this breach is not material. She says it's not a big deal. And because it's not material, it's an independent obligation. It's an independent obligation, which means that the breach of that duty does not absolve the buyer of the home from the duty to pay for it. They did breach the contract, to be clear. The construction company breached the contract, but the buyer doesn't get off the hook. Now, okay, fine. Give me some other facts that have nothing to do with the law but clearly drove this case. A few other basic things to say. And you can ask for co-counsel. You've done an amazing job if you'd like, but you can also take a crack at it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask for co-counsel.
Okay, we'll go for co-counsel. I've got Lucas and Mike. Yeah.
I think Kent was kind of a known cheapskate.
Okay, like not just a cheapskate. Like Fairfield's got a point to make. Wasn't just a cheapskate, but, and this is for you. This is my message to you. What was his profession? He was a lawyer. Do not do this. Do not do this. The court is just going to be like, wind. Where's the wind coming from? Why do I feel the desire to just annihilate somebody for being a legal dork? Right, but it's the same thing like when you do if you're in my property class, you probably won't be. It's unfortunate. I've only ever had one instance where I had the same contract in property classes. But if you do, there's like this great case on adverse possession where you could fix the boundaries between your property and the next person's property. If you'd been used, like if you built on it and you lived there for years and years and years, and then there was this like one attorney who started like mowing other people's lawns and claiming their land, and they're just like, nope, we are absolutely going to draw the line at you, ya dork. This is a version of a lawyer who represents themselves as a fool for a client. Just like this guy could not have framed it worse. Look, was it a breach of contract? Absolutely. Is the court going to let this lawyer not pay for his house? Like, there's not a snowball's chance in hell. The court's going to do the obvious thing. The court's going to say, you have to pay for the house minus the value of the pipe. What was the other remedy they could have done from PV House? Yeah, just like repairing the hellscape, it's put in the right pipes, right? And why do we know that the court's not going to order that? Yeah, it's grossly out of... And when we talk about the increase in value is grossly disproportionate from the benefit received, that kind of argument is? What's that? It would be dead weight loss if we let them do it, and so therefore this result preserves. It's just inefficient if we let them do that repair it standard, just like PV House, right? And so we're relying on economic efficiency as our justification for not doing this. Of course, remember that economic efficiency does not drive our discussion of subjective preferences. Let's try it. Can I contract for a 30-foot tall, hot pink statue of Darth Vader in my backyard? I can. What will it do to my property values? Absolutely. Okay, look. I do not need the encouragement. My wife will not thank you. Right? But you can say, like, it's going to tank my property values. Clearly inefficient. Can I pay money to destroy my own property? Yes, of course I can. See almost every badly designed McMansion ever, right? So the idea here is, like, you can subjectively do this. Note that once courts start talking about benefit and loss, they've already made a decision. They're already going with this commercially available objective framework, pricing framework. All right, cool. Any other questions about Jacobs and Young versus Kent? It's the old rule that disestablishes, that gets rid of the common law sense that contractual promises by default are independent, and instead says, nah, we're going to treat them only as dependent. We're going to treat them as dependent, fine, for major contractual promises that are in the contract and are not time, dinky, or expressly stated in the contract. But there's a flip on that one too, which is fine, but what if there's just a tiny, tiny breach of this otherwise important promise? And the answer is, we're not gonna let you off the hook if we can convince the court to take an objective commercial framework for it. How much would we have to change in this case? Because is there anything about this case that makes you go, yeah, but this is starting to get close to the line for me? Like, I get it, Kent really helped sell it by being a jerk, right? But is there anything about this case that makes you go, like, if you had it on the bar exam or my exam, you'd go, yeah.
If you just change, like, what part of the house they mess, like, if it's appliances or something, like somebody spends 40 grand on an appliance package and they get a different brand.
So, right, so just changing a different thing. What would the different thing you want to change be, and what would it be about? Laura, you had your hand up, kind of?
Yeah, I was just gonna say something similar, like contracting for a very specific element being in your house.
So there's very specific, and then there's in your house, right? Like, you demanded that in particular for your house. By the way, can anybody just tell me a story? You are free to make up anything in the universe. Tell me a story in which Kent's absolutely right. Like, this was the most important part of the house for him. Really, really important. Riley, yeah.
His father had worked in this factory until the day he died.
Right.
You can't imagine living in any other type of house than a ready-made house.
Right? Like, I mean, this was a problem when I worked for Jones Day because they represented Pepsi, and those wars are just deep, right? People care. Like, if that were that kind of background and connection, you suddenly start thinking, maybe we give, like, force and effect. Maybe, by the way, maybe he's boycotting another type of pipe, right? For deeply personal, subjective reasons. You could imagine that kind of story. If I'm playing games with you, and if on the exam, which I know I've been able to do before, because I've seen me do it, and I wanted to give you something as close to the standard of Jacob and Young's versus Kent, I wanted to give you that exact case, but flip it, give me the facts of that case. I just want to make it almost exactly identical to this, but I'm going to flip your intuitions and make you go, yeah, I read Jacob and Young's. I'm going to enforce this clause. What do you change? Practical matter. This is exam question design. Let's just change these things that people have already raised. Yep, Liam.
You would set the requirement for having the pipe as a condition of payment.
As a condition of payment, that would be one, right? Make it absolutely clear, lovely. Let's change the pipe requirement. What do we have this case be about instead of pipes? Okay. Chandeliers. Okay, what's that change?
It's very aesthetic, very visible, very central to your house.
Okay, so we're doubling down on the residential rather than on the commercial. We're doubling down on the specific rather than the fungible, right? We're readjusting all of those things. Tell me anything else. So you do the inside of the house, right? You'd make it be part of the clear aesthetics. We saw that with more in aesthetics clauses, John.
If you're doing like a gut reno in Brooklyn where the trend is visible pipe, exposed brick, and I have my heart set on the aesthetic.
Right, so you make it aesthetic, you make it subjective. You just pile on the facts that make it residential, aesthetic, personal, specific. None of these standards are like written out in black letter in the law, but they absolutely change the outcomes of these cases 100%. I don't think it's very hard for any one of you to think of a circumstance in which you had contracted for something specific for your home. Like, let's try a specific kind of heating system. And then they put in gas, and you really needed a heat pump because You don't want the earth to burn, and so you're like, well, let's do something different from that, and then they put in a series of wood stoves or whatever. Like can you see how easy it is to push on this? And you're not going anywhere near the standard. You're just dealing with how you're changing the facts. Okay, and obviously that's just a lever pull, because the more you describe this to a court as subjective, aesthetic, personal, specific, specifically negotiated for, right? The more you do that, and the more you talk about hidden, fungible, commercial, equal in value, market. By the way, my favorite argument out of Reading is, what did they make of the pipe description? Do you see that in the notes? Because there's a further problem. Jake.
Almost industry standard specifies single type.
Right.
Companies try to pass off steel.
Right. By the way, apparently there's a big divide in American language. You might ask yourself in your head which one you are. Some people say soda, some people say pop. All right. Here's the thing, though. There are a few, the true, the proud, who refer to the whole range of this stuff as a Coke. Like there are just people who just Coke, right? Yeah, that's right. All right. Can you see how that would be the case? But then the problem is that comes back to bite me, because if I'm asking for a Coke within that culture, then a Pepsi might be fine, because that's what I'm calling all of them. Now, that's not why I'm calling all of them, because Pepsi, there's something wrong with that. But you could see the argument, right? So they're trying to do an interpretive method, changing what the meaning of the words mean to make it even more commercial, fungible, industry standard, rather than specific, aesthetic, personal, and so on. All right, I think that's about enough on that. Any questions on Jacob and Young's? It's one of my favorite cases. You should really know it backwards and forwards, but it is pretty solid across the board. All right. Then, yeah. I think what I'm going to do, we have a few minutes left. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to discuss, we'll pick up with impossibility, impracticability, and frustration pretty soon. What I'm going to do is a preview of it, because otherwise you can start running into these and you don't entirely understand what you're looking at. So just as a preview, remember we've already seen commercial impossibility. We've already seen frustration of purpose before, right, as defenses to a breach of contract. What we're doing now here is talking about an upgraded version of that. So let's talk about first why we moved away from impossibility. This is review from stuff we've already done. Impossibility. Talk to me about impossibility. What's the defense of impossibility? Okay.
It's literally impossible for you to fulfill your end of the contract. So say you contract to sell someone a house, and then that house burns down. That contract is now impossible. So you have to defend impossibility.
Great, love it, love it. Okay, yeah, true, that's impossible. Is it really? You could rebuild the house. What's your response to rebuilding the house? We're now playing lawyer games. Is it possible if you rebuild the house? Anybody over here want to say, yeah, but that's not what I asked for?
I mean, that house had very antique wood, and it was the only one that existed in the whole market, and I really, really wanted that one.
Right, and what accent do you need to be using at this point?
The gentleman.
Yeah, exactly. No, and why am I doing that? Why am I saying, yes, every piece of property is absolutely unique. You can't substitute one for the other. What am I saying here? What's going on? Where are we seeing that? Yeah, land qualifies for specific performance because it's considered to be unique. And so what we start seeing is a brand of cases in the modern intuition that adopts the ideas of impossibility into the UCC standard. We do not use this standard for houses. We use it for cars, though, called casualty to identified goods. Casualty to identified goods. Impossibility becomes casualty. What do we mean? We say if a kind of good is necessary for the contract because it's so unique, and if it is damaged through the fault of no party, nobody's at fault, before the transaction closes, then the contract is simply called off because of casualty of the goods. But that's a very narrow modern interpretation of impossibility. Why is it so narrow? Remind me why it's so narrow? Because let's try this. Let's just say it's not a specific car. Let's say it's not Loretta Lynn's Lincoln that gets hit by hail, and therefore we have 2615 like casualty to identified goods. You can't actually sell it, right? Because it doesn't exist anymore. Let's just say it's a Ford Fusion, and the Ford Fusion is a dealer sells you a Ford Fusion. Before it comes to pick up through no fault of anybody. Boom. You gonna let the dealer off the hook? Nope. Among other things, what do we know about the dealer? He's got more cars, right? It's not impossible to perform. And so impossibility gets this real pressure on it. When you think about it hard enough, you got to realize it's not truly impossible, like deeply, deeply impossible, unless you get your British aristocrat on. And even then, you don't really believe them, right? Like, the house burned down, right? British aristocrats getting their feelings about land and property, but let's say they built it better than before, like as a practical human being, wouldn't you be like, okay, like that's fine, that is a substitute, that does work? Right. So it's not impossible, and what that means is that the modern law has branched off from our discussions of impossibility and frustration of purpose, and has become a more usable and practical standard. It has become, for example, casualty to identified goods, where the goods are destroyed through no one's fault, and they are necessary, and I mean necessary for the completion of the contract. That's one way of looking at it. And then the other one is we just take away that impossibility requirement. We say, nah, we're going to let you off the hook when it is, and here's the big one. This is the one you do need to know. UCC, commercial impracticability. Commercial impracticability, which is not impossible at all. Let's try it. Let's say that you and I have a contract for generators, and the zombie apocalypse happens. Now, I'm here to tell you that the zombie apocalypse, although I have clearly anticipated that, you can see the signs outside my office. I've got a little tag says the only problem about the zombie apocalypse is going to be pretending I'm not excited. But the idea, so we maybe have anticipated it, but let's just say it happens and we would call all of these contracts off. Is it impossible to deliver impossible to deliver the generators? No, just pull together like a Mad Max style caravan, right? Like we've got enough people with shotguns up on top. In the World War Z book, you learn to use 22s because zombies work better that way, and like you try to scramble the brains of the zombie, that kind of thing. But like you get everybody together, and then you like go deliver the generator. We're gonna let you off the hook, even though it's not impossible. It's just wildly expensive. The reason that I'm making this point with zombies, though, is because that is the fight in most of these commercial impracticability cases where performance would be possible, just wildly costly. Just wildly costly because something has happened that nobody thought about that drove prices through the roof. Now, you could get the goods, but it's going to be wildly, wildly expensive. What's wrong? And everybody's nodding, like everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense, but let's complicate our understanding of that. What's our normal response when party A and party B contract with each other, and then the price goes through the roof, and one of the deals is like, I lost my bet with the universe, I would like out of the contract now. What do they say? Cats, is that a dangerous hand or is that?
Oh, no, I mean, I can answer the question.
Yeah.
You lost your bet against the universe.
Yeah, you lost your bet against the universe, so yeah, it's a you problem, right? Like, yeah, tough shit. No, like as a matter of law, tough shit. No, that's absolutely right. As a matter of law, right? This is the very set of circumstances this is the very set of circumstances we don't let people off the hook. What are we gonna do? The thing you need to know about commercial impracticability is twofold. We're going to go through the cases. This is where I'm going to end the class. We're going to go through the cases, but I need you to know two things about it. The first is its black letter definition. Here it is. The occurrence of a condition, the non-occurrence of which was a basic assumption of the parties to the contract. The occurrence of a condition, the non-occurrence of which was a basic assumption of the parties to the contract, and which materially affects performance, but that's the key part that you need to know. All right. The second is I need you to have a practical sense of it. I need you to have a sense of when contracts get called off. Let's try it. Let's pick a good like generators, the price of generators. Reports are coming in from an Army base in Arizona that something's gone wrong. But we have these contracts for generators. So are we going to call that off? Going to call those generators off? Right. So a number of police installations in Phoenix go dark. Are we going to call off the price of generators continues to go up. People are like, what's going on? The preppers get involved. All the billionaires are like, hey. All right. You going to call it off yet? Maybe not. Do you see the point? It's like shooting the moon in hearts. Like you just go up and up. This price shock goes up and up and up, and you can have a hell of a price shock and not excuse the contract. It's not until that ticker at the bottom of the screens that says zombie apocalypse. Once you've got that ticker at the bottom of the screen, and this is the way I describe it, this is profoundly practical, but you may use it on my exam. Don't use it on the bar exam. Do use it in practice. The standard for commercial impracticability is a price shock plus a PR firm. It's a price shock plus naming it. Let's try it. The weather has changed, therefore the cost of oranges is going up. Do sellers of oranges get to breach their contracts, sell them to somebody else for a higher price? They absolutely do not. Call it hurricane and give it a name. Do Florida orange growers get to call off their contracts and get more from somebody else? They absolutely do. Do you see it? A price shock alone is not enough. You need a price shock plus the ticker at the bottom of the screen. You need a price shock plus a name, plus a PR firm. You call it something. When you call it the zombie apocalypse, finally we start calling everybody's contracts off. That's what I need you to see as a practical matter. All right, I'll let you go. Thanks so much, folks. Great class today.